I used to believe loyalty meant something. I used to believe that if you gave years of your life, your sweat, your time, and your sanity to a company, it would give something back. Recognition. Security. At the very least, respect. But standing in that glass-walled office, the city stretching endlessly behind my boss's shoulders, I realized that all those years meant nothing. She leaned back in her leather chair, the kind that seemed too large for any normal person but fit her arrogance perfectly. Her lips curled into a faint smile as she spoke the words that gutted me. "You're finished here." That was it. No ceremony. No second chances. No thanks for the late nights or the sacrifices I made, the birthdays I missed, the relationships I lost. Just 3 words, delivered like a death sentence. I remember gripping the folder in my hands tighter, my knuckles whitening as her voice continued, soft but sharp, like a knife sliding between my ribs. "You've done fine work. But you're not the right fit for the company's future." Fine work. Not the right fit. It was laughable, almost insulting, to hear her reduce nearly a decade of my life to something disposable. Her name was Victoria. To the outside world, she was the visionary CEO, the woman who had dragged a failing company into international success. She was charming, articulate, and powerful. But behind closed doors I knew the truth. She was ruthless, manipulative, and hungry for power. She treated people like pawns on a chessboard, useful until they weren't. And now I was no longer useful. I tried to speak. I wanted to defend myself, to throw in her face the numbers I'd pulled, the deals I'd closed, the long hours where I'd saved projects from disaster. But my throat closed up. My voice wouldn't come. All I managed was a whisper. "Why?" Her smile widened just a fraction. "Because I said so." That was it. That was her reason. Not performance. Not restructuring. Just her decision, unchallenged and final. I left her office in a daze, the buzzing of fluorescent lights in the hallway suddenly louder than I had ever noticed. People glanced at me as I walked past, their eyes quickly darting away. They knew. Word spread fast in this place. The shark had tasted blood, and everyone else was grateful it wasn't theirs. At my desk, I found a cardboard box already waiting. Someone from HR had been efficient. Too efficient. My things. Personal photos, a coffee mug, the pen my father had given me when I first got the job, were neatly packed, as if I'd already been erased. I stood there for a long time, staring at that box, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. My colleagues avoided my eyes. People I'd called friends were suddenly strangers. No one dared to speak up. No one dared to show sympathy. Because here, loyalty wasn't to people. It was to survival. I carried that box out of the building, each step echoing like a funeral march. The sun outside was blinding. The world kept moving, cars honking, people walking, life continuing as if my world hadn't just collapsed. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the city lights through my window. My phone buzzed with messages from coworkers. Short, safe condolences. "Sorry to hear about today. Tough break. You'll land on your feet. Keep in touch." None of them meant it. They were just protecting themselves. No one wanted to be caught in my shadow. I poured myself a drink. Then another. I wanted the alcohol to blur the edges of my rage, to drown the humiliation that burned hotter with every passing second. But instead it sharpened it. I replayed her words again and again in my mind. Because I said so. Arrogance. The cruelty. The way she dismissed me like I was nothing. That was when it happened. That was when something inside me shifted. I realized I couldn't just move on. I couldn't just land on my feet and pretend this was a setback I'd overcome. Well, this was deeper than that. This was betrayal on a level that demanded retribution. That night I made a promise. I would bring her down. It wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be easy. But it would be inevitable. Because revenge wasn't just a fantasy. It was survival. It was justice. The days that followed blurred together. First, I thought about applying for other jobs. My resume was solid, my reputation, at least outside the company, was good. But something gnawed at me. Every time I pictured myself sitting in another bland office, starting over, I saw her face. That smug smile. Those dismissive words. I couldn't move on until she was destroyed. So instead I started to watch. I knew Victoria. I knew her habits, her patterns, her weaknesses. I had spent years in her orbit, watching the way she worked, the deals she made, the way she manipulated everyone around her. And I knew one thing for certain. She had secrets. People like her always did. I started small. Late nights in front of my laptop, combing through old emails, documents I'd saved without even realizing. Bits of information, threads of conversations, details that seemed meaningless at the time but now glimmered like fragments of a larger puzzle. I remembered a project, a merger she had pushed through last year. On the surface it had looked clean, profitable, even visionary. But I remembered discrepancies. Numbers that didn't add up. Questions that were brushed aside too quickly. I dug deeper. The more I looked, the more I found. Shell companies. Hidden payments. Consultants that didn't exist on paper. It was a labyrinth, but I could see the outline of something massive. And then, one night, as I sat in the dark, the glow of my screen illuminating the half-empty glass on my desk, I found it. A deal worth $80 million. A deal that looked legitimate to the board, to the investors, to everyone. But beneath the polished reports, it was rotten. Money was being siphoned, redirected through layers of fake contracts and phantom accounts. Victoria wasn't just ruthless. She was corrupt. My heart pounded as I scrolled through document after document, the pieces falling into place. This wasn't just corporate greed. This was fraud on a level that could destroy everything she had built. And I had the evidence. But I couldn't just take it to the authorities. Not yet. I knew Victoria. She had connections. She had ways of making problems disappear. If I went at her head-on, she'd bury me. Well, I had to be smarter. I had to be patient. Revenge isn't about anger. It's about precision. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as the weight of it settled over me. This was bigger than I imagined. And it was dangerous. But I was already in too deep to stop. I whispered the words out loud, just to hear them, just to feel them echo in the silence of my apartment. I'm going to destroy you, Victoria. And in that moment I believed it. The morning after I discovered the truth about the $80 million deal, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Sleep had been a stranger since the day I was fired, but now, for the first time, my exhaustion felt like a weapon. I wasn't just a broken man anymore. I was a man with purpose. But purpose is a heavy thing when you carry it alone. I tried reaching out to a few old colleagues. Nothing direct, just casual messages, questions disguised as small talk. But I could hear the fear in their responses. Short, guarded replies. Some didn't answer at all. Victoria's shadow stretched long, and no one wanted to stand in it with me. One night I called Daniel, a guy who had been my closest friend in the office. We'd spent years together, venting over beers after late nights, laughing about the absurdity of corporate politics. If anyone would stand by me, I thought it would be him. "Hey man," I said, trying to sound casual. There was a pause on the other end. Then his voice came, tight, cautious. "Hey. Listen, I can't really talk." I frowned. "Come on, Daniel. It's me." "I know," he whispered. "But she's watching everything. You don't get it. She's dangerous." Before I could answer, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my pulse hammering in my ears. Even Daniel was scared of her. That was when the isolation started to settle in. Days bled into nights. I barely left my apartment. The curtains stayed drawn, my fridge empty except for a few takeout containers and bottles of water. I lived off caffeine and adrenaline, glued to my laptop, chasing threads of information through encrypted files, old contracts and hidden ledgers. And slowly, a picture began to emerge. Victoria wasn't just dipping her hands into one deal. She had built an empire of corruption. Offshore accounts, kickbacks, bribes disguised as consulting fees. It was all there, buried in the fine print. hidden in plain sight for anyone who knew how to look. And I knew how to look. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized how dangerous this was. One night, as I scrolled through another set of documents, I noticed something strange. Ping on my email. Not from anyone I knew, but from an anonymous sender. The subject line was simple. Stop digging. The message was empty. Just 2 words typed in bold at the center of the screen. We know. My blood went cold. I slammed the laptop shut, my chest heaving. They knew. Somehow they knew I was on to them. I paced the apartment, every shadow suddenly alive, every sound amplified. I checked the locks on my door twice, 3 times. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was a blocked number. I didn't answer. For the first time since this began, I felt fear claw at me. Not the fear of losing my job or the fear of failure. This was deeper. This was survival. Victoria wasn't just corrupt. She was ruthless. If she sensed a threat, she would eliminate it. I spent the next few days looking over my shoulder, jumping at every noise in the hallway. Once, I swore I saw the same black car parked across the street for 3 nights in a row. When I finally mustered the courage to step outside, it was gone. But paranoia doesn't leave easily. The world outside didn't feel safe anymore. And the worst part, I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Who would believe me? To everyone else, Victoria was a brilliant CEO. I was just the bitter ex-employee who couldn't let go. That was how the isolation consumed me. But fear has a way of sharpening the mind. I realized then that if I wanted to take her down, I couldn't rely on anyone else. I couldn't trust friends. I couldn't count on allies. This was my fight and mine alone. So I doubled down. I created backups of everything I found, stored on encrypted drives hidden in places even I had trouble remembering. I documented every piece of evidence, every fraudulent signature, every offshore transfer. And the more evidence I gathered, the more obsessed I became. It was no longer about justice. It was about survival. If I didn't destroy her, she would destroy me. But obsession comes at a cost. My apartment became a prison. My reflection in the mirror grew thinner, paler, haunted. I hadn't spoken to another human being in days. My voicemail was full of calls from my landlord, threatening eviction if I didn't pay rent. My bank account was bleeding, the severance money dwindling faster than I'd expected. I was falling apart. And then came the knock. It was late past midnight. The sound echoed through the silence of my apartment, sharp and sudden. I froze, every muscle tensing. The knock came again, louder this time. I crept toward the door, my breath shallow. Who's there? I called, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. I reached for the peephole, but when I looked, the hallway was empty. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stepped back, every instinct screaming at me. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence. I barely slept that night, every creak of the building making me jolt awake. The next morning, when I finally dared to step outside, I found an envelope taped to my door. No name, no address, just a single sheet of paper inside. Walk away. This is your last warning. My hands trembled as I read the words. I looked up and down the hallway, but it was empty. That was the moment I understood the depth of what I was facing. This wasn't just a game of numbers and documents. This was life and death. Victoria wasn't just protecting her empire. She was willing to destroy anyone who threatened it. But instead of scaring me away, the warning fueled the fire inside me. I was done being afraid. I was done being a victim. If she wanted me silent, she'd have to kill me. And if she wanted war, I was ready to give her one. From that day forward, I lived 2 lives. By day, I played the part of a broken man, a ghost wandering through the city with nothing left. By night, I was a predator, stalking her empire from the shadows, documenting every lie, every theft, every betrayal. I hacked into servers I once managed. I used old access codes she had forgotten to revoke. I slipped past firewalls, sifted through financial records, intercepted emails. Every discovery was another piece of the puzzle, another nail in her coffin. But the deeper I went, the more I realized I wasn't just fighting her. I was fighting a machine. Victoria had built a network of corruption so vast, so intricate, that exposing it would take more than evidence. It would take precision, timing, and above all, patience. And patience was something I had in abundance now, because I had nothing left to lose. The deeper I went into Victoria's empire, the darker it became. Every night I unearthed something worse. Politicians on her payroll, judges she had bought, charities that were nothing more than money laundering fronts. It was a labyrinth of lies, and at the center of it all stood Victoria, untouchable, powerful, smug. But what froze me the most was discovering what she'd done to people who had crossed her before. I found records of a whistleblower, an accountant who had started asking questions 5 years earlier. At first he went missing. Then, a few weeks later, they found his car at the bottom of a river. The case was ruled an accident. But buried in Victoria's emails was proof that she had ordered it. That was the moment I stopped doubting myself. This wasn't paranoia. This was survival. And yet, the fear that should have broken me did the opposite. Hardened me. If I wanted to take her down, I couldn't simply expose her. Evidence wasn't enough. She had too many allies, too many pawns ready to spin the narrative. I needed to do something bigger, something public, something irreversible. I needed to make her empire collapse from within. The blueprint for revenge. The first step was to bait her. I needed her eyes on me, not just her suspicions but her full attention. If she thought I was desperate and reckless, she'd underestimate me. And underestimation was my greatest weapon. I started sending anonymous leaks. Small ones at first. An email chain hinting at shady contracts. A ledger that didn't quite balance. I made sure they reached people who would panic but didn't have the power to act. Enough to make noise, not enough to burn me. And it worked. Within days, I felt the pressure tighten. The black car returned to my street. Strange faces lingered in the coffee shop downstairs. My internet lagged, as if someone else was watching everything I did. She knew. And she was closing in. But what she didn't know was that I had something she could never predict: time. All those nights alone, drowning in paranoia and fear, I had been building a weapon. A digital time bomb. I had gathered every piece of evidence, every transfer, every fake signature. And I had built an automated system to release it. If I went silent for more than 48 hours, the files would scatter across the world. Journalists, regulators, anonymous platforms. My life was the trigger. If she touched me, she destroyed herself. The first strike. The next phase was psychological. I crafted an email. Simple, clean, devastating. I sent it directly to her personal inbox, the one she thought no one had access to. The subject line was just 3 words. I know everything. Inside was a single attachment, a screenshot of one of her offshore transfers, complete with her digital signature. I imagined her reaction when she opened it. The flicker of fear she'd hide behind her perfect smile. The way her fingers would tighten around her glass of wine. She didn't respond immediately. But she didn't have to. That night my power went out. My phone lost signal. And when I checked the hallway camera, the feed was blank. She had sent people. I sat in the dark, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, a kitchen knife clutched in my hand. Shadows moved outside my door, then faded. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days. But they didn't break in. Because they knew what I had. And for the first time I realized the balance of power had shifted. Turning the knife. I didn't just want her afraid. I wanted her empire to eat itself alive. So I sent leaks to her allies, carefully chosen pieces of evidence that suggested she was double-crossing them. A falsified email here, a doctored ledger there. Enough to breed distrust. Soon, I heard whispers of board members questioning her leadership. Politicians pulling away. Journalists circling like vultures, sensing blood in the water. Victoria was scrambling. I could feel it. But I wasn't finished. I broke into the company servers one last time, and there, buried deep, I found the weapon that would end her. Contract. Signed, sealed, undeniable. It linked her directly to an illegal arms deal overseas, something even her money and influence couldn't bury. If I released this, she wouldn't just lose her empire. She'd lose her freedom. And maybe her life. I stared at that file for hours, the weight of it pressing on me. Part of me wanted to send it immediately, to watch her world collapse in real time. But another part of me hesitated. Revenge had consumed me. Had cost me friends, peace, sleep, sanity. What if, when it was over, there was nothing left of me? But then I remembered the warning taped to my door. Walk away. And I knew there was no walking away. The final confrontation. I decided to face her. Not as a ghost in the wires. Not as a name in her inbox. Face to face. I arranged a meeting. Neutral ground. A hotel lobby where the walls were lined with cameras. Where neither of us could make the first move without witnesses. I sent her a message. Meet me or lose everything. She came. I still remember the sound of her heels on the marble floor. The way she moved with that same unshakable confidence. But this time I saw the cracks. The tightness around her eyes. The forced smile. Congratulations, she said, sitting across from me. You've made yourself a nuisance. I leaned forward. I've made myself your nightmare. I slid a flash drive across the table. She didn't touch it, but her eyes never left mine. On this drive, I said, is everything. Every lie, every theft, every deal that could put you in prison for the rest of your life. I've already sent copies to people you can't reach. If anything happens to me, it all goes public. She studied me for a long moment, then laughed softly. You think you've won. I smiled, a bitter, tired smile. No. I think I've survived. For the first time, I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Not anger. Not arrogance. Fear. And in that moment, I knew I had her. To collapse. I didn't release everything at once. That would have been too merciful. Instead, I let it trickle out. One scandal at a time. Each leak more damning than the last. Each headline eroding her power, her reputation, her empire. The board turned on her. Her allies abandoned her. The politicians who once toasted her name now called for investigations. And finally the authorities stepped in. The last I heard, Victoria was facing charges that could bury her for decades. Her empire was dust, her name poison, her future gone. As for me, I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. Revenge isn't clean. It doesn't heal the wounds or bring back what you lost. It just leaves you standing in the ruins, wondering who you've become. But when I walked through the city one evening, free, anonymous, invisible again, I realized something. I wasn't broken anymore. I had looked into the abyss, and I hadn't blinked. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Closing voiceover hook, YouTube style. And that's the story of how I went from being a loyal employee to the man who brought down an empire. Some say revenge is a poison. Maybe they're right. But sometimes poison is the only antidote against corruption. Would you have done the same in my place? Or would you have walked away?